Hello again. We are back with Richard Makara, who is going to be walking us through supercharging go-to-market operations and analytics teams with a scalable data architecture. Um, as I said in the last session, you can drop any questions that you have into the Q&A section for the end of the session, and then kind of chat with us with any thoughts that you have as Richard presents. But yeah, I will turn it over to Richard to run us through his presentation. And if you have any questions or anything like that during any of this, just drop that in chat, and I will see y'all in about 24 minutes for our Q&A.
Very cool. Thank you so much, Ali, Operational Analytics Club Census. Super excited to be here. My name is Richard. Nice to meet all of you. Hope to chat with you, as many of you as possible, over on Slack. So today, I wanted to talk to you about a story, supercharging go-to-market teams, analytics teams with a scalable data architecture. Before I get into that, just a brief introduction on myself, sort of like why am I here talking about this? So I'm originally a marketer. I ended up learning some technical skills along the way, CRM stuff, integrations, slowly but surely horizontally moved my way into technical roles. Eventually, I became a growth engineer. I've only ever worked in B2B companies, so everything I say here today is from that lens. Any advice, data modeling stuff is purely from like how I would sort of what I've seen working and not working in B2B. I've also had the privilege to purge a couple of CRM instances, like straight up throw away a Salesforce instance, buy a new one, and then figure out how that should work. Same thing with HubSpot. So if you ever got any questions on those tools, I'm more than happy to talk about that. Yeah, I think most recently I've worked at Paddle, and this is the story of the last project I did there. So supercharging go-to-market operations and analytics teams with a scalable data architecture. Really, this is a story about figuring it out as we went along. A little bit of context on Paddle. So if you're not familiar with Paddle, Paddle is a payments infrastructure company for SaaS companies, so specifically software. They are what you would call a merchant of record, which means that technically when your customers buy from you, they technically buy from Paddle, and Paddle just pays you. So Paddle takes care of things like taxation, currencies, payment gateways, credit cards, all in one type of package. You can think of it sort of like a Stripe, TaxJar, ChargeBee, all those tools combined into one, so you don't have to worry about things, specifically in software selling. Paddle, again, sells to other companies. There's a relatively strict know your business, know your customer process. So, certain things need to happen before we allow anybody to sell through Paddle. So that's something to keep in mind with some of these data things that we talked about. I worked in a team called revenue operations, and revenue operations at Paddle was interesting because it was not sort of it was not structured in your typical way. Typically, revenue ops teams or operations teams have something like a marketing function, sales function, success function. At Paddle, we flipped the script a little bit, and specifically Ben Wilder, who's still head of revenue ops over there, he had this idea that we would build the team based on functionality and area of expertise. So for example, we had a dedicated team for data and insights. They would work on the warehouse, SQL, DBT models, that sort of stuff. The tooling and training team, they would focus on the human elements of the tools we use. So like HubSpot, Salesforce, Outreach, like what fields do we need to create so that it makes sense, but so it doesn't overwhelm people, so it's actually usable, useful. And then there was the growth engineering team, which was my team. I like to call it the creative problem solving department, which is basically what we did. But essentially, growth engineering in the context of Paddle was a commercial data backend team. We had to figure out how the tech stack worked, integrations, data flows, any usable data that is needed by the analytics team, for the operations teams, sorry, not operations, but the downstream teams like sales, marketing. We were sort of figuring out the basics. We perhaps had the closest relationship to product and engineering, but we were still not under product and engineering at all. So just a little bit of extra context. RevOps has a strategic mandate at Paddle. So it's not a team that waits for something to happen. They sort of decide that, okay, this quarter we need to build this type of system or these type of projects because of reasons X, Y, Z. We would strategically tell the C level also, like, here's the data, here's where we're lacking, here's what we need to do. And central ownership of data processing and tooling was part of the team. So you could not go and buy any tool without it going through revenue ops and especially growth engineering, because we had to still vet that it actually worked with the rest of the stack. Now, at the end of 2021, everything was going really, really well. We had this product called Hull, all-in-one data platform. We had just rebooted it, redesigned the entire instance, and it was working nicely. It was doing a lot of things for us. It was an ETL, reverse ETL, warehouse transform, etc. Worked. But next thing that happened is they got bought, and as expected, they announced end of life within a few months. So that was a bit of a messed up moment for us, because we knew we had to replace the entire thing again. So we kind of got thinking, what is it that we're going to do? What can we do? How much time do we have even? Hull was going to die at the end of 2022, but we definitely were not going to wait until December to be off the platform. So we decided to split the time in half. Between December 2021 and the present day, we had to figure out, what the hell do we even need? What tools are available? How do we stitch them together? Learn SQL and DBT, first of all, because neither of us were familiar with those tools, and then actually deliver the entire project. So as you can imagine, the excitement that was in December quite quickly turned into anxiety the closer we got to the deadline. So let's talk about December and January, the starting point of this entire thing. We started off by thinking, like, okay, what is it that we're actually trying to achieve? Because we don't want to select tooling just for the sake of tooling, because that's where you go wrong, really, really wrong. So what is it that we're trying to achieve? We knew we had to get feature parity, like Hull was doing all these things for us, so we need to at least be on the same level of functionality. But at the same time, we wanted to build something scalable and sturdy. Like, we did not want to end up in the same situation again, like having to replace the entire thing in 2-3 years. And thirdly, we wanted to keep the operational hubs independent, so to say. So marketing lived in HubSpot, and we were providing them with all the possible and necessary data so they could do segmentation in there, do all their operational stuff, the emailing, the marketing, etc. Salesforce was also completely independent. We would pump it full of data that they needed. And sort of like, we wanted to keep that idea of being independent from the central warehouse or the central repository of data, so to say. And we also looked at the commercial team's needs, so sales, marketing, success. Paddle being a B2B company, long history in this sort of being relatively quite data driven, we needed to keep the account-based approach. So all of our reps were working on accounts, not contacts, not leads, not anything. Assignment of accounts, as well as various demo requests and account requests, also happened through sort of like round robining the entire account through tasks. So we knew we had to build something for that. Everybody was really used to having data enrichment provided by us. So it's something we also needed to keep in mind. And of course, the speed of things, like we couldn't go from 5-minute turnaround of a website lead to all of a sudden 2 hours. That was not an option. So we came up with this concept of a growth engine, which you could call it the modern data stack. You could call it the variation of it, postmodern, pre-modern, whatever. It's same. But the idea there is that we wanted to provide usable go-to-market data, enable timely action, and just connect the entire stack. growth engine sounded pretty nice because it's supposed to be independent of tooling, so to say. It's the idea that we can plug anything in it, mangle the data in any way we need to, and then just live a happy life. So we broke it down to components. Again, like at this point, not even thinking about any tooling at all. So we needed an ETL. So we needed to scan and copy static data, or we called it static data, basically like records that don't disappear or are unique, like a person, a company, opportunities, that sort of stuff. We also needed a fast lane for events because those happen quickly and they need to be actioned usually. ETL wasn't suitable for that, or like a traditional data scanner. We also needed to build a bunch of our own data models. That's where the identity and attribute engine comes from. The idea there is very simple, not simple. The idea there is that we had to build these ourselves. There was not ever going to be a tool for that. Lastly, of course, we had an actionable warehouse because if the data just sits there, it's only half usable. And lastly, we had this concept or this idea of an API call center. Basically, like because we subscribe to several APIs, Clearbit, Cognizant, a couple of other ones, and we needed a way to call the API when a new record showed up, like a new email, new website domain. And we didn't want to lose the data into the ethers of I don't know, some S3 buckets. So we built this call center where we could ping the new record and it would call through each of the APIs and then return the data back to us into the warehouse. But I digress. Still in kickoff, I mean, when we started building out the actuals, we looked at what we already had. Engineering was working on Fivetran, migrating to Snowflake. The data and insights team was already building a dbt cloud, and we still needed a CDP and a reverse ETL. For us, the main concern there was how do we, will these tools that we select be good enough for enterprise scale? So we ended up with Fivetran, Stack, a bunch of dbt models, 110 to be exact, census, and N8N. This is basically what it looked like. Again, I mentioned the modern data stack is a similar concept here. ETL on the left, CDP as well, warehouse, reverse ETL. Now, getting started, we were very confident in ourselves. You know, we had just come up with this great plan, very smug, and we started contacting all these providers. Like we needed to start trials, we needed to start doing proof of concepts. Like we had these ideas, but if we couldn't prove them or make them happen, then you know that would have been a pretty bad situation. So if there's anything I learned from this process, is that insist on the proof of concept. Like test your own use case because you know best how something should work. And vendors tend to they say they can do X, Y, Z, but maybe there's always room for misunderstanding. And I cannot stress more. Be friends with legal and info security. They will help you move the project quickly. For us, we figured that out really quickly. We're like, okay, if we keep them happy, they'll give us the tooling that we need. Accept that. Same with engineering. We needed them to set us up with the environments so we could become independent of them. So it's definitely something that went well in this case. Now, I want to get into the little bit of nerdy side. So show you a couple of graphs. This is where we started going a little mad. We're already 3-4 months into this project. Now we have to actually write a bunch of dbt code that neither me or Axel had never touched. So we had all these cookie ideas. But I think the main point is that we had to start from foundational concepts, right? We were not doing the cool stuff. We were not building the revenue forecasting models. I don't know what even you call them, the mathematical things that projects X, Y, Z. We had the boring job. We had to figure out what the hell is a person, a company, event, our product account, right? So that was our job. And at the same time, we had to adapt to this new environment of SQL, Snowflake. We were no longer living a JSON world. So yeah, Yeah, sorry. One last thing to mention here. We also applied this idea of clean at source if possible. So probably because we were not really good at writing SQL or doing SQL transformation, we figured that, okay, if we can clean the data or individual items before it reaches the warehouse, that will be much, much better. Because we know how to write TypeScript, JavaScript. A lot of these tools support that sort of stuff. So, for example, we had this URL to domain API app that we built. It very simply, when you get a URL, you can ping this destination and it will give you back a clean version of it. So basically, we then were able to skip, building macros in DBT, regular expression. That's also something that I can barely wrap my head around on. So to move on, like we started with the foundations. What is a person? What is a company? How do they relate to each other? Is something we just needed to figure out, especially the relational mapping. I'm sure you've heard the term identity resolution. Identity resolution typically is used in the context of users, mobile app IDs, that sort of stuff. But we had to do it one level above because we were a B2B company. We really needed to figure out how to do user to account association. We also need to figure out how does our product relate to an account, because the original unique identifier for a product was an email address, for example. So how do we sort of map these things together in a way that we want to? So this slide here is wishful thinking. This is what we wanted to achieve, or strive to achieve, so to say. At the same time, we just had to sort of turn real life concepts into data concepts, right? A person can exist in multiple systems. It's the same person, but somewhere it's a HubSpot ID XYZ, in Salesforce it's something else, etc. And at the same time, like you could deconstruct something like a company into items that you can observe in the real world, right? So you have a top level domain, you have related domains that is still the same thing, system IDs and business IDs. So we kind of had to like figure out these like very simple building blocks. And I just want to show you one sort of example of how we built the unified company table, right? So as with anything, we started with staging models. We just selected the columns we needed from HubSpot, Salesforce, our events, data sources, anything you could think of. And we started building the identities first. So in the case of a company, we needed to list out every single distinct domain we ever had. Of course, before we did that, we cleaned it. Like we made sure it's actually a domain, it's a valid URL, that type of stuff. After that, we could start building the attributes, for example. So company name, estimated revenue. We had some other more complicated things like strategic region, which was comprised of like 5 different data sources and items that did not match together. So yeah, this is sort of like the approach we took to building the foundational data models. Again, this is extremely simplified. There's, I think, in total 110 SQL files somewhere out there. But I did want to show you a couple of the cool things that we also did. So I mentioned the user to account association. That was very, very important to us. So we put effort into it. Basically, what we did is whenever we found a new email address, we would, of course, run it through a cleaner, make sure that everything's lowercase, no trailing spaces. We would check what the domain extension is, right? So there's a massive list on GitHub somewhere of all free mail providers. Just check against it. Is this a Gmail? Is this a hey.com? Is this a 10-minute mail, whatever? Like those we didn't want in our CRM, so to say, right? We would accept them on the marketing side, on the warehouse side, but we didn't really want to push people's personal emails into Salesforce under accounts because that didn't really make sense to us. And yeah, so if you pass the test of not being a free mail, being a valid email, we would add you to the person to company association table. We would do something similar with accounts as well. There were like corner cases like Blogspot, Heroku app, web.app, which is Firebase, right? So nowadays it's actually a legit URL, legit company domain, something like myproject.heroku app. And if because we had these sort of cleaner macros running on the URL side as well, it would strip the subdomain, and we would get these funky scenarios where a bunch of people were a bunch of companies were merged into Heroku, even though they weren't Heroku. They should have been something like reconfigured.heroku.app. My favorite topic, multi-domain aliasing. If you don't know, Clearbit's enrichment API gives you this neat little package called domain aliases, which basically say that these domains are associated to the top one. And we built something similar, or we built a way to use this, right? So we had this helper table where we had all of our domains listed on the left-hand side. So reconfigured io.com.app, and what we could receive data with whichever of these. But then because we knew what it was associated to, we would then always output the main domain in any of our subsequent models. However, all the fun things aside, time was running out as it is in this chat. Actually, we had a lot of reservations, and we had to actually bring everything into production, right? Finalize tooling contracts, finally hit dbt run in production out of the development schema. And then we had to figure out how the hell do we actually run the models? How do we do the syncs with senses? One good thing that we did is we actually created Salesforce sandboxes and HubSpot developer accounts, so we could run actual parallel copies of our systems. In terms of designing syncs, for example, here's where we conceptualize with our sort of slow data, things that is not we're not in a hurry with, right? We would have this massive unified accounts table, and then a Salesforce specific view. And because our Salesforce instance would not accept duplicate domains, so you could only create with a unique domain. So fine, we set up the create sync to only use domains. But if we wanted to update accounts, for example, for whatever reason there needed to be multiple with the same domain, we could use the account IDs there. So that sort of gave us a little bit more flexibility. Then, of course, we had the fast lane items, the events, the demo request, the account request that needed to bypass this monstrosity of a DBT model, DBT project, and had to go sort of do the same actions but quickly. So we came up with this. Well, Axel came up with this concept of the fast lane. Essentially, we would receive an event in our CDP, pass it on to the call center, call Clearbit, return the event itself along with Clearbit data to N8N, and then we could populate a separate table. So then we would have enough information to do all of our aliasing process, user to account association. So then we could quite neatly and without a worry keep a continuous sync and a small and run DBT models every 5 to 10 minutes. Okay, end of the line. It's June, July, and it was quite a project. So big shout out to Axel, who's finalizing it right now. It's going live. Few other items I wanted to mention here is it was really important for us to have written migration and risk plans. It's just simply saying what are we going to do? How are we going to move, right? So running two parallel systems, not deleting hull code. We just needed that for the stakeholder management. Running two systems was good. And yeah, if possible, don't do a full engine switchover in one go. So yeah, just to summarize, replacing a data stack is fun and terrifying, absolutely terrifying. If at all possible, select your tooling after you've come up with what you need. Be very cold with your vendors, ask for a POC, be very, very proactive with InfoSec and legal, and focus on the boring data models. Build with modularity and test with real data. 5 seconds left. Nice.
Great job on the timing, Richard. You got it right down to the wire. There was a question from Randy on how you decide to handle multi-domain aliases, but you covered
Hmm.
that, I think, pretty much in depth. But are there any additional thoughts that you would like to add there?
I mean, I'm really happy to nerd out on this topic. Multi-domain aliasing is my favorite thing. How do we decide to handle it? I think the main piece is we had one data source that we trusted. So Clearbit's domain alias payload is something that I'd be very happy with. There were exceptions, so we had to create a blacklist, sort of like, so for example, um, Google.com, Firebase, the sort of big domain providers as well, they would sometimes like have like hundreds and hundreds of domains in that alias payload, and they were obviously not correct. It's because I, as far as I understand, like, no, the way Clearbit decides this is they look at redirects, so 302 redirects. So if 100 pages redirect back to Google, then of course they're going to think that they're all part of the same domain structure. So yeah, Clearbit first, blacklist, and then we would also sort of look at email extensions as like as the last piece. But I'm sure if we ever got into that in the warehouse world. We definitely had that working in Hull.
Great. I think I will refer Randy over into the OA Club to kind of discuss with you afterwards because it sounds like you also have a lot of depth on that question. So it'd be great to get some more thoughts there.
Yeah,
Um,
please.
but sweet. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the presentation and for sharing all of your kind of lessons learned, and also for your great GIF and meme uses. We appreciate it all of the time in every presentation. But yeah, we will go ahead and release Richard into the world / into Slack to answer any follow-up questions you have.
Yeah,
And we'll be back in a couple of minutes with Chase Sherman's
yeah,
presentation. So
yeah,
I appreciate it. Thanks again, Richard, for participating.
yeah. Thank you so much for having me. See you on Slack. Bye.